Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a question we got from you guys about navigating the sometimes complex world of Filipina dating culture.
Oh, yeah.
To help us unpack this, we'll be looking at a YouTube video you sent us.
Okay.
It's called What Do Filipinas Want in the Bedroom? This and Other Mysteries Explained.
Mm.
And it's by the Filipina P.
This is a great choice for this deep dive. Um, the Filipina P brings a really interesting perspective to the table. She blends those personal stories with observations about Filipino culture.
Yeah,
It's like you're getting a sneak peek into the cultural nuances. Yeah, the kind of stuff you might not just pick up on your own.
exactly. And that's kind of what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
To help you decode some of those potentially perplexing behaviors and situations.
Right.
So one of the first things the Filipina P talks about is this concept of adoption.
Okay.
And I have to admit, my initial reaction was like, wait, what?
Yeah, I can see why you'd say that. It's
Um,
definitely not about the legal process of adoption, as
yeah.
you might typically understand it. She's talking about how in Filipino culture, relationships can progress much faster than what you might be used to in Western cultures.
So it's not uncommon for a Filipina to want to move in with you relatively early on in the relationship.
Right.
And it's not necessarily about rushing into cohabitation.
Right. It's more about expressing a desire to be closer, to solidify the relationship,
Hmm.
be together as much as possible.
Yeah, this makes me think about that funny story the Filipina P tells about a guy having to practically shove his girlfriend into a taxi just to get his apartment back.
That's a funny story. But it does highlight a really crucial point. So while this desire for closeness is a beautiful thing, it also underscores the importance of setting clear boundaries
Hmm.
and communicating your expectations right from the start,
Yeah.
especially if you come from a culture where moving in together is a much bigger step.
It's all about finding that balance, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Respecting those cultural differences,
Yeah,
while also making sure that you're both on the same page in terms of how the relationship progresses.
absolutely. And this idea of cultural context also applies to other aspects of dating a Filipina,
Yeah,
like communication styles.
right. The Filipina P dives into a situation where a Filipino woman's communication suddenly drops off in a long-distance relationship.
Okay.
And it'd be easy to assume she's lost interest, but apparently that's not always the case.
Exactly. What might seem like a red flag in a Western dating context could simply be a shift in communication style.
Hmm.
In Filipino culture, initial communication in a relationship tends to be very intense.
Okay.
But as the relationship progresses and a sense of security develops, the frequency and intensity of communication may naturally decrease.
So it's not necessarily a sign of disinterest,
Right.
but rather a sign that she feels more comfortable and secure in the relationship. That's a really important nuance to understand.
It is. Yeah. And it goes back to the importance of open communication.
Mhm.
If you're feeling uncertain or notice a change in communication, don't hesitate to talk about it.
That's such a valuable takeaway. It's always better to communicate directly than to make assumptions based on your own cultural norms.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a bit,
Mm.
the Filipina P also touches on a topic that often comes up in cross-cultural relationships, and that's the role of family.
Right.
She cautions against reading too much into things like family introductions,
Oh, okay.
or even children calling you dad.
Yeah, she basically says those things don't necessarily guarantee the seriousness of the relationship. You really have to look at the bigger picture.
Exactly. While those gestures can certainly be meaningful, it's important to understand the cultural context. Family plays a central role in Filipino culture,
Right.
and showing respect and closeness to your partner's family is expected.
Yeah.
But it's crucial to evaluate the relationship, based on your interactions with your partner
Mm.
and not solely on these external factors.
That makes a lot of sense. You could easily get caught up in the excitement of being welcomed into the family
Yeah.
without really assessing where you stand in the relationship itself.
Precisely. And it's a good reminder that every relationship, regardless of cultural background, needs a solid foundation of trust, communication,
Mm.
shared values.
Now, I know we're going to dive into the bedroom aspects a bit later, but I did want to touch on another interesting point that the Filipina P brings up about food.
Okay.
She talks about a date where a Filipina sticks to rice and fish at a fancy buffet, even though there are tons of other options. Like, why not try the steak or the lamb?
It might seem counterintuitive at first, but there could be several cultural factors at play here.
Like what?
Well, Filipinos generally have a strong aversion to wasting food.
Ah, so she might have been worried about taking more than she could eat.
That's one possibility. Also consider the concept of comfort and familiarity.
Okay.
She might have simply felt more at ease with dishes she knew and loved.
Yeah.
The Filipina P makes a great point about how some Filipinas, especially if they're not completely fluent in English, might not feel comfortable explaining their reasoning in detail.
Hmm.
So they stick to simpler explanations.
So instead of saying, I'm not a big fan of lamb, she might just say, I'm full, or I prefer rice.
Exactly. And this is where being observant and understanding those unspoken cues becomes really important.
It's like learning a whole new language,
Yeah,
the language of cultural
you
nuances.
could say that. And the more you understand those nuances, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the intricacies of dating someone from a different culture. It really is. And speaking of cultural nuances, the Filipina P tackles a topic that's often shrouded in stereotypes, the dynamics in the bedroom.
Oh, yeah.
She debunks the myth that Filipinas are passive, setting the record straight with some real talk.
Yeah, she makes it clear that just because some Filipinas might initially appear reserved, it doesn't mean they lack desire or willingness to explore.
Right. It's important to remember that cultural norms and personal experiences can influence how someone expresses themselves, especially in intimate situations.
I think it's great that she addresses those stereotypes head on. It
Right.
helps to break down those misconceptions and encourages a more open and honest approach to intimacy.
Absolutely. And on that note, she also brings up a rather intriguing observation uh, about Filipinas and their sleeping habits.
Okay.
Apparently, some Filipinas like to hold their partners well, while they sleep.
Okay, that's definitely not something I've heard before. It makes you wonder what's behind that.
Exactly. It's a fascinating glimpse into the complexities of human behavior and how cultural norms and personal preferences can intersect.
Do you think it could be related to a sense of security
Mm.
or a subconscious desire for closeness?
It's certainly possible. Think about the emphasis on physical touch and affection in Filipino culture. Holding hands, hugging, sitting close together. These are all common expressions of warmth and connection. It's interesting to consider how those cultural norms might extend to even the most intimate aspects of a relationship.
That's a great point. It also makes me think about the role of history and colonialism in shaping cultural norms.
Uh-huh.
The Philippines has a long history of being influenced by different cultures.
Right.
And those influences are bound to show up in various ways, including how people express intimacy.
Absolutely. And that's what makes exploring cultural differences so fascinating. It's like peeling back layers of history and understanding how those layers have shaped the way people interact and relate to each other.
So, for someone who's new to dating a Filipina, what would you say are some of the most important takeaways from this deep dive so far?
I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of approaching the relationship with an open mind and a willingness to learn. Don't jump to conclusions based on your own cultural norms or stereotypes.
Right. It's about recognizing that what might seem strange or confusing to you could be perfectly normal in her culture.
Exactly. And that goes for everything from how relationships progress to communication styles to expressions of affection.
So basically, communication is key. Talk to each other, ask questions, and be open to understanding each other's perspectives.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
The Filipina P also touched on the issue of financial assistance in long-distance relationships, advising caution and suggesting that it's not always a reliable indicator of genuine intentions.
That's a really important point to address. While generosity and support are admirable qualities, it's crucial to be mindful of the potential for power imbalances in cross-cultural relationships, especially when financial disparities exist.
It's a reminder to be realistic and to approach any request for financial assistance with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yes, and to always prioritize open and honest communication about finances and expectations.
The Filipina P's insights into family dynamics were also really eye-opening. It's easy to get caught up in the warmth and hospitality of Filipino families. But as she points out, it's important to distinguish between cultural gestures and genuine relationship milestones.
Absolutely. While being welcomed into the family fold can be a beautiful experience, it's crucial to ensure that the relationship itself is progressing at a pace that's comfortable for both partners.
It's all about finding that balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Embracing the cultural aspects
Uh-huh.
while also making sure the relationship's foundation is strong.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to dating in any cultural context.
It's like that saying, don't judge a book by its cover. You know, you have to look beyond the surface to really understand what's going on.
Exactly. And that's where curiosity and a willingness to learn come in.
The Filipina Peas video definitely gave me a lot to think about, especially her take on the adoption concept.
Yeah.
It makes me realize how important it is to have those upfront conversations about relationship expectations
Uh-huh.
and to be sensitive to the fact that those expectations might differ across cultures.
It's a great point. Assumptions can lead to misunderstandings. And that's especially true in cross-cultural relationships, where cultural norms and values might not always align.
It also made me chuckle when the Filipina P talked about Filipinas and their preference for rice and fish, even at a fancy buffet.
Right.
It makes you wonder, is it a cultural thing, a personal preference, or maybe a bit of both?
Right. It's a good reminder that you can't always assume, the reasons behind someone's choices.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's best to simply ask and be open to hearing their explanation.
And let's not forget that unexpected tidbit about the unique sleeping habits.
Yeah.
It's definitely food for thought, and maybe even a conversation starter.
It certainly sparked some interesting questions, didn't it? It just goes to show that there's always something new to learn about human behavior
Hmm.
and the fascinating ways in which culture and personal preferences intertwine.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one piece of advice you would give to someone who's interested in dating a Filipina?
I would say embrace the journey with an open heart and an open mind. Be curious, be respectful, and be willing to step outside of your comfort zone. Filipino dating culture, like any culture, has its own unique beauty and complexities. By approaching it with a genuine desire to understand and connect, you'll open yourself up to a world of richness and rewarding experiences.
Beautifully said. It's all about embracing the adventure and learning from each other along the way.
And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point. There's so much more to explore and discover.
Huge thanks to the Filipina P for her insightful and entertaining video, and to you, our listener, for joining us on this fascinating exploration of Filipina dating culture. We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and maybe even sparked a bit of curiosity to learn more.
Until next time, keep diving deep.